Welcome back to Forward Progress, part of the Hammer Betting Network. I'm your host, Jason Cooper, alongside Nicholas McGee, 49ers beat writer for A to Z Sports, and also a 49ers super fan. You can check out Nicholas McGee on X at Nicholas McGee 24. Today, we'll be covering everything you need to know about the San Francisco 49ers heading into 2024. But before we get started, quickly, I want you guys to comment below how many wins you think the San Francisco 49ers will get in 2024. Let's jump right into it. The 49ers finished with a 12-5 record last year. And of course, we know what happened. Went all the way to the Super Bowl. But for some reason, Kyle Shanahan just cannot get that last win of the season. Before we get into 2024, Nicholas, give me one word or phrase to describe the 2023 49ers season.
Heartbreaking as well. I think how we've really, you looked at how well the regular season went, particularly kind of from that Eagles game where they backed up all the smack talk from the previous year and kind of laid waste to the Eagles in their own stadium. And then they go into the postseason, they have these two incredible comebacks, really, particularly the one in the NFC Championship game. And you think it's kind of the names on the trophy a little bit. And then to be in that stadium as I was back in February, and just to see Mahomes driving down the field to do it again, you just couldn't believe it. You couldn't believe this wasn't going to happen again. So it's going to be a hell of a challenge for them to get over. They've already brought it up several times in press conferences, kind of like how difficult it's going to be to get over that heartbreak again. But they certainly have the team to do it.
Yeah, heartbreaking is a great way to put it. And I mean, that Super Bowl, one of the biggest things that stuck out to me, we were talking about a little bit before, was Kyle Shanahan was going nuts at defensive coordinator Steve Wilks all throughout that game. Some of the play calling was questionable. It even got to a point where they had to Shanahan called a timeout to kind of change up because he didn't like the alignment of the defense for a play. So it seems like a lot of the blame was pushed onto defensive coordinator Steve Wilks, who's now former defensive coordinator of the San Francisco 49ers. So by the standards and quality of the San Francisco defense last year, I mean, they left a lot to be desired, right? They're on paper one of the best defenses in the league, and they weren't really performing like that all season. Now they bring in Nick Sorenson, who is going to replace Steve Wilks as defensive coordinator. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're hearing about Nick Sorenson and kind of what do you expect out of him as a defensive coordinator for the 49ers?
Yeah, it was. It's a real reversion to type from what they had. So last year with Steve Wilks, after DeMeco Ryans left to take over the head coach of the Texans, it was kind of like a gamble for them to go with somebody outside the organization. They've never really done that under Kyle Shanahan before, so they gambled with Wilks in that respect. Shanahan conceded at the end of the year that it wasn't really a fit, and there was several points that in the season where you got the suggestion that might be the case. Like the communication with the linebackers was iffy at times, so that led to Wilks moving down from the booth to the field to improve it. There was a weird zero blitz against Minnesota at the end of the half in week 7 that cost them a touchdown. Ended up losing the game effectively. And then you had the thing at the Super Bowl where he was following the zero blitz again against Mahomes on that final drive, which caused Shanahan to go nuts, as you said. So this is kind of an overcorrection in a way with Sorensen. Never been a coordinator before. He's been a special teams coordinator, but never coordinated the defense. But it's somebody who's been in that defensive system for all his coaching career since he retired in 2010, because he started with the Seahawks and Pete Carroll, which is where this defense gets its roots from. So he's been in it essentially his entire career. Been a Niners defensive assistant for the last 2 years. He was the defensive pass game specialist. He also did the takeaway meeting, kind of what they call the ball meeting, to review all the takeaways from the previous game on offense and defense. So he's got that experience in speaking to a group, and I think he's just going to do and leading the team. So he's going to do that bread and butter, I think, essentially. But he's also going to have that influence of Brandon Staley, who they hired to be an assistant head coach, with an overview of the defense as well. So it's kind of be a new guy who should be very experienced in running what they want to run, running their bread and butter, as I said, but also having that guiding hand of Staley, who might bring some innovation as well. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that dynamic works out.
Before we get into the next part of the episode, just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors over at Pinnacle. Pinnacle is the world's sharpest sportsbook, offering competitive odds for 25 years. If you're looking to bet on the NFL, NBA, NCAA football, or any sport for that matter, you should have Pinnacle as one of your available outs. Bet smart, bet Pinnacle. Must be 19 plus, and please play responsibly. Yeah, and I'm curious to see how they run this defense, especially considering two staples down the middle of the defense might not be ready for the start of the season. You can correct me if I'm wrong here, but Drew Greenlaw, of course, we all remember that brutal Achilles tear he had in the Super Bowl, which is just terrible. That takes about 7 months to recover from. That places his timetable around mid-August. And then obviously Talanoa Hufanga, who tore his ACL, that also takes quite a long time to recover from, and he might not be ready to start the season. So just tell me a little bit about what you've heard about both of these guys, where they're at for their injury recovery timetable, and if you think both of them or one of them will start the season for the 49ers.
Yeah, Greenlaw recently received the Dwight Clark Award, quite a prestigious award in the Bay Area, and he was walking, which is a good sign. He said as much. So that's small wins, but I think there was initial thought that Greenlaw was saying he wanted to target to be ready to week 1, which obviously all players are very overconfident to almost an arrogant degree. But I think he's now scaled that back a bit. That was quite a bit of bluster, and he was saying when he was accepting this award that he really wasn't sure how many games he was going to play this season. So I don't think Greenlaw's going to be ready for week 1, and I think it's still very up in the air when he will. I think, being more conservative, it would be better to expect the second half of the season, which is why they signed Devondre Campbell to play next to Fred Warner for a bit. They tried to sign Eric Kendricks, but he backed out to sign with the Cowboys instead. So they've got Campbell, a few young guys as well. So I'd expect them to hold the fort for the time being, or at least over the first half of the season. Fanga, Sorenson in his first press conference said Hufanga been out on the practice field was a good sign, but he hasn't been seen practicing at OTAs yet. I think he's been predominantly in the weight room. That's more realistic that he could be ready for week 1, given the timing of the injury and how quickly you tend to heal these things these days. So yeah, I think Hufanga's probably the more optimistic one. Yeah, but they've got Jair Brown at safety, who really came on towards the back end of last season. They drafted a safety in the 4th round in Maliek Mustafa. But it wouldn't be a surprise, given the safety market in free agency just hasn't been there, and there's still so many experienced guys still on the market. I would not be surprised if they nipped back in and added at that position, particularly given the guy that started at safety for him last year, Sean Gibson, is still available. He talked about retirement a couple of years ago, hasn't retired yet. So if they wanted to just have a fill-in who's going to know the system straight away, there's that option there as well. So wouldn't be surprised if some insurance added, even if they're probably a little more confident about having him back.
Yeah, and we're recording these around the start of OTA. So right now, the only addition that we've talked about here to replace one of those injured guys, if they're not ready for the season, is the guy that you mentioned there, Devondre Campbell. But again, at this point, so many safeties available in the market, it's kind of okay if you have Hufanga's status be up in the air, because like you said, they can just pluck someone off free agency. I want to continue with the defense here because there was quite a bit of shuffle on the defensive line for the team. The 49ers lost Kinlaw, Armstead, and Chase Young. Those 3 guys are out. Played a lot of snaps for that defensive line throughout the season and leading up to the Super Bowl. They brought in 5 defensive linemen as well. They added a ton of depth there, most notably Leonard Floyd, who's probably going to be an everyday starter for them, and Maliek Collins. So why don't you tell me about these moves on the defensive line? Do you feel like this is an improvement to the pieces that were already in place before these guys came in? How do you think they're going to complement Javon Hargrave and Nick Bosa?
Yeah, I think in terms of Floyd, I think it's definitely an upgrade. They obviously traded for Chase Young, the trade deadline. They have traded for Randy Gregory before that. Neither of those trades really got going, given the impact. Like Chase Young and Randy Gregory actually pretty well in the Super Bowl, but before that, they didn't really give them the consistency off the edge that they wanted, and given them a complement to Bosa, somebody else who can disrupt and really make life a bit easier on Bosa and take some of the burden off him. Floyd, close to 40 sacks over the last 4 seasons. He's just he's getting up there, but he's just been consistently productive for the Rams, for Buffalo. He's a little bit bendy. They haven't really had a bendy edge rusher since T Ford, who's obviously injuries kind of ruined his career. So he gives them something there compared to the power that Bosa brings off on the other side, and just somebody who can convert the pressures that Bosa creates. Because often Bosa, he only had 10.5 sacks last year, but he was creating a hell of a lot of pressure. But just other guys who weren't getting there. Floyd can get there and have those cleanup sacks. On the interior, like Collins actually had, I think it was by Sports Info Solutions, had a top 10 pressure rate among defensive tackles last year. So in that sense, you could say it's an improvement on Armstead. I don't think it's as clear cut as Floyd over the edge guys. I'd just say it's a comment. It's not a downgrade. It's kind of like a like for like almost, and should mesh well with Hargrave there. The wild card is they signed Yetur Gross-Matos from Carolina on a 2-year deal. It kind of surprised people. Got nearly close to $20 million. Hasn't really had that much production. I think he had 4 sacks around last year, and that was his career high. But they kind of view him as a guy. You had Charles Omeni, who's now with the Chiefs a couple of years ago, who can kind of play on the edge on run downs and then kick inside on pass rushing downs, and be a skilled interior rusher as well. So he's kind of a wild card there because he ticks all the athletic boxes that they want in defensive linemen without the production. So I think even though the name brands maybe aren't there, with obviously Chase Young is a huge name and stuff, I think it probably might just be a little bit of a better situation with more kind of like solid kind of second tier guys that can provide that complement to the star man in Bosa and Hargrave.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Kind of do your best to cause as much problems to take away or open up space for guys like Hargrave and Bosa. I mean, in theory, the Chase Young move was supposed to be really good for the team, but it felt like down the road and as the playoffs went on and more eyes were on the Niners, it's like, what is this guy doing? He just seemed incredibly, I don't want to call him lazy, but it just seemed like he checked out for a couple plays here and there. So curious to see how Leonard Floyd performs in that role over Chase Young. That's pretty much it. All I want to talk about with the defense. I want to switch over to the offense because the offense is a lot more interesting to talk about. To start off, we talked a little bit about injuries, but let's talk about some injury prevention, some depth here on the tackle position. It seems very thin for the 49ers. They extended Colton McKivitz. They have obviously Trent Williams, and they recently signed Chris Hubbard. But other than that, they don't really have anyone to cover in case we see a cluster injury here at the tackle position. Are you worried at all about the depth at tackle for the 49ers coming into the year?
I think everybody associated in terms of fans and media is always worried about a tackle position with the 49ers. So the people that aren't worried seems to be the 49ers, which is they have the opportunities to address it in the draft. Like, could have taken in the first round, took a wide receiver. Could have taken in the second round, they still had Kingsley Sumatia was still on the board, traded back a spot, and the Chiefs picked him. So it was kind of an eyebrow-raising situation that they just didn't address it. They even had their offensive line coach come out yesterday and say that he cares more about people that score touchdowns and we can develop offensive linemen in the 5th to 6th round, which is kind of an incredible thing for an offensive line coach to say that anyone doesn't want to spend premium picks on the offensive line, essentially. Yes, like I say, they have Chris Hubbard, who's kind of like a veteran swing guy. They have Jalen Moore, who was a swing tackle last year. He actually played pretty well when Trent Williams was out last year, but again, it's not somebody you'd want to be in there for 6, 7, 8, 9 games of the season. They had the options beyond that for on the ground. They drafted a guard in the 3rd round, Dominic Boone, who can play tackle, but again, you don't want to be in that situation. So they're living dangerous a little bit. Colton McKivitz was kind of like average start level play. Obviously, Trent Williams is Trent Williams, and as long as he's healthy, they're absolutely fine on that left side. But McKivitz did give it quite a lot of pressure, so they've got a lot of ride on him taking the stride in his second full year as a starter. Otherwise, and if God forbid Trent Williams gets hurt for an extended period of time, then it could be a very difficult time for them.
Yeah, and I think to me, this is almost just thinking about the passing game. This is almost a signal of them saying, like, obviously they trust Brock Purdy, but maybe this is just their way of doubling down and saying, listen, we're going to have to not spend some money somewhere, right? We're spending towards the cap. We got to find ways to get an advantage here, and maybe just stepping back and saying, you know what, we won't look and get offensive tackle depth this offseason. That's their way of saying we trust Brock Purdy to kind of perform regardless of the line in front of him. You mentioned the draft and them not taking tackles. They decided to opt for drafting Ricky Pearsall in the 1st round. Tons of rumors were swirling around this wide receiver group all offseason. That Pearsall pick added more fuel to the fire. We heard a couple trade rumors about Brendan Ayuk. Then we started hearing things about Deebo Samuel as well. And then on top of that, I believe it was yesterday at the time of recording, Jawan Jennings got extended a 2-year deal. I think $10 million guaranteed in there. Not nothing. A very significant signal there from the 49ers. So OTAs have kicked off, and it doesn't seem like Ayuk's going to be participating in them whatsoever. That's pretty normal for a player coming into their contract year. But just curious, what is the latest you've heard on Brandon Ayuk, and where do you see the pieces fall for this wide receiver group? And one more question for the fantasy heads out there. Tell me a little bit more about the role you see for Ricky Pearsall in this offense.
Yeah, it's difficult to provide much of an update on Brandon Ayuk. It's been so quiet. But this is how Niners tend to do things. They tend to play the waiting game a little bit, and they try and do extensions around training camp. We've heard that he wants more than Sam Brown got, which was $28 million a year, and he probably wants to be in the higher echelon of the guaranteed money in terms of fully guaranteed. So up in that Tyreek Hill range, which is $50 million guaranteed, that kind of region, I think, is what he's probably looking for. I think we're not going to see him at OTAs. I doubt we'll see him at mandatory minicamp, despite it being mandatory, because they tend to just waive those fines even when they just get waived off and the contract eventually gets signed. I think it'll eventually get done. I just think the Niners are probably being a little bit naive and sticking to their usual waiting game, because there's so many other receiver contracts getting signed that the price just seems to be getting pushed up the longer they wait. But that's just how they've always done things. And yeah, I think once he does slot on, it will be kind of as it was in terms of the top two. The interesting one is, as you've laid out there, is what happens behind them with Ricky Pearsall and Javon Jennings both kind of in that competition for the wide receiver free position. They think really, really highly of Javon Jennings, everything he brings in the run game, and he was the best receiver in the Super Bowl, throwing a touchdown and scoring the touchdown that put them ahead in the fourth quarter. So they love everything he brings for them, but they obviously feel very highly about Pearsall as well, drafting in the first round. And there's already been some glowing positive reports about Pearsall and his rapport with Brock Purdy early on, which doesn't really surprise, given he's that kind of quick receiver who can get open quickly and is good after the catch, and he just does all the little things right. It was a word on him coming out of the draft, so it didn't really surprise that he's kind of meshed quickly with Purdy. So I think what they're looking for is they want kind of be able to mix and match a little bit when they play more 11 personnel with three wide receivers out there. They can have Jennings out there for a bit of contested catch upside down, that bigger body who can give an edge in a run game if you want to run the ball out of kind of spread formations. But with Pearsall, it gives them kind of a bit more of a man coverage beater, which they didn't really have in the Super Bowl, which I think is why they went in the first place. It's just to give them another option who can actually beat coverage quickly, because we saw when the Chiefs pressed them a lot in the Super Bowl, they didn't really have an answer, which was surprising for Ayuk, but not really surprising for Debo, because that's really not his game. So I think in a fantasy perspective, I think Pearsall, you can expect him to play kind of that third receiver role in the slot and maybe spell Debo and Ayuk a little bit more, because he can do all the motion stuff as well. So I think he will have a role, but I think it would be, if I was a fantasy player, I'd be more interested in investing him in a dynasty league rather than a season-long league this year. The dynasty investment could pay off, because I think this would likely, if you're reading the series, be Deebo Samuel's last season with the Purdy extension coming potentially probably next year, and it would potentially be a record-breaking one. So I think Pearsall is a guy for dynasty, stash him for next year and probably reap the rewards then.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And of course, like of any head coach / offensive coordinator or offensive play caller, I believe Kyle Shanahan is the one who you want to have more tools in his tool belt. So it just kind of makes sense why they go out and grab Ricky Pearsall. Let's flip over to expectations on the year. Let's take a look at the odds presented by Pinnacle. Win total right now for the San Francisco 49ers is at 11.5, slightly juiced towards the under. For them to win their division is -196, conference +250, and Super Bowl is around 600 +660. After his first full season as San Fran quarterback, Brock Purdy looks like the real deal. The team's bought in on him. They're positioned to be the favorites coming out of the NFC, most likely to be in the Super Bowl. I mean, my question to you is, what are your expectations for Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers in 2024? And how do you think Brock Purdy will follow up his all-star season from 2023?
I mean, as much as it's difficult to come back after the hangover, that's history is there. That is a very difficult thing to do, to recover from that devastating blow of losing the Super Bowl. This team's kind of built to do it, and the last time they had this challenge was the COVID year, so it was kind of like a mulligan, so to speak. Like, they had so many injuries in 2020 that you couldn't really take that seriously as to how they were responding to losing the Super Bowl, because they were just so injured, and it was a weird year, and everybody just wanted to forget about it. This year is kind of like the first time we've actually seen Kyle Shanahan with a proper team trying to bounce back from this kind of Super Bowl hangover. The reason I'm so confident that they will is they've kind of got a really soft start. Like, obviously the Jets is a big headline opener. Everybody's really excited to see Aaron Rodgers back, but it's Jets have a great defense, but it's a 40-year-old quarterback going against with a bad offensive line going against a very good defense. And then after that, they've got one game in their first 6 against a playoff team from last year, and that's at the Rams, and they haven't lost at SoFi Stadium ever. But in the regular season, they've lost in the playoffs there. So by the time they face the Chiefs in Week 7, they could. There's a universe where they're 6-0. I don't know whether that's realistic, but it's certainly a distinct possibility. So yeah, they likely have been in the position to be in the sharp end of the NFC again by the time they face a team that they just can't beat. And their rivals that they've got on the schedule, they face the Cowboys, they face the Packers, and they face the Lions. I'd say those last 2 teams there, they're probably the stiffest competition outside of the division. But it's tough for me to say right now, although both the Packers and the Lions are ascending, and the Lions they both came very, very close to beating them. Is that it's tough to stack up those rosters right now and say that they're definitively better than the 49ers. So yeah, I think this is how maybe I'm being a bit too optimistic, but I would take the over on that win total if it was me, just because of the way the schedule lines up and just for the quality this team still has. And I think Brock Purdy is a big part of that. You asked me about him. What made last season so incredible? I mean, the MVP stuff got a bit tiresome towards the end, and kind of Lamar just kind of snatched it away from him and said it's mine and settled that debate in a hurry. But what I think what people missed as everybody was getting lost in that debate is that was a season that he didn't really have an off season. Like he threw for a franchise record in yards in a single season, having come off elbow surgery. So this year he gets a full off season to go for everything. And Shanahan's already been talking about how impressed he's been, and they expect his processing to be better. And the weird thing about that is that his processing was his strength anyway. So he's expecting that to be better, and he's had the full off season to practice and everything. I think I would be expecting more of the same. I became a Brock Purdy believer a long time ago, and there's nothing I've seen to suggest he wouldn't deliver again. I mean, despite the result being the wrong one from Nine's perspective, his Super Bowl performance was pretty impressive and going toe-to-toe with Maroon. So I expect him to stay on that same trajectory and head towards the massive contract they're going to have to pay him next year.
Yeah, those are all great points. And like we mentioned, like even if you are worried about that defense being maybe a little bit hurt and not ready to start the season, you said they have a soft schedule to start the year. Everything is pointing towards obviously up for Brock Purdy. The sky is high for expectations according to the San Francisco 49ers for the team. So I'm excited for the season to start and see how they end up. That does it for us today. So if you enjoyed the content, please let us know in the comment section down below. Also comment your thoughts on the 49ers in 2024, what you expect out of them. Curious to hear your thoughts. If you made it this far, that means you like this content. So please just press that like button. It goes a long way for us. And if you enjoy this content, you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We are previewing all 32 NFL teams here on Forward Progress as we make our way towards training camp. So make sure you turn on notifications when you subscribe. And if you're not a fan of notifications, there should be a button on your screen somewhere for a playlist for all the 32 NFL teams that we're breaking down. Click on that, bookmark that. You don't want to miss out on these breakdowns. Make sure you check out Nicholas on X at Nicholas McGee 24. His Twitter will be in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in, guys, and we'll catch you in the next one.